Good morning, students. So today I am come with new subject as well as new topic. The name of today's topic and paper is actually Linux system administration. So it is one of the important papers, especially basic computer science 6th semester. So before going to details of Linux system administration's paper, first we should discuss what is system administrators and its role. So if we see what is system administrator, then the person who is responsible for setting up and maintaining the system or server is called a system administrator. So system administrator may be members of an information technology department. So if we see the roles and duties of a system administrator, basically the duties of a system administrator are wide ranging and are vary widely from one organization to another. So system admins are usually charged with installing, supporting, and maintaining servers or other computer systems and planning for and responding to service outrages and other problems. So other duties may include scripting or lighting program project management for the system related project. So system administrator is have lots of duties and responsibilities. For example, some important responsibility of a system administrator has following. So one, user administration, setting up and maintaining accounts. So user accounts are created, maintained, and highly secured. User accounts are actually maintained by the system administrator. So maintaining system, the whole system is maintained with the help by the system administrator. Verify that peripherals are working properly in a system in a laboratory environment. So his duty is to verify the peripherals, input output, and others devices so that working properly. So quickly arrange repair for hardware in occasion of hardware failure. If some hardware failure occurs, then he quickly manage so that the service is continuously giving without any errors. So monitor system performance. So when we add some systems or in a system in a laboratory, then he should monitors the performance of the system whether it is efficient or not. So create file systems. So whole file system are created by the system administrator. Install software. Lots of software is needed for the system on an organization. So his primary duty is to install what type of software is needed in the system. So create a backup and recovery data and policy, means recovery data and its policy. So recover the some, if some needed, so data should be recovered and it should be backup so that for future use. So whole policy building is nothing but system administrator. So monitor network communication. So whether the system and the network, then it should be efficiently communication so that it monitors whole network so that the system is working properly or not. Next, update system as soon as new version of operating system and application software comes. So if some new version of operating system and new software comes to the system, then it must automatically update it. Next, implement the policies for use of the computer system and network. So the policies, new policies or other policies are implemented. Mainly he implemented the policies in the computer system or network. Set up security policies for users. So it is important duties of the roles of administrator so that security policies are maintained. A system administrator must have a strong grasp of computer security firewalls introduced. So this type of next documentations in the form of internal wiki. So documentation also needed so that some other person can understand better the system about this password and identity management. So user account, password and identity is managed by the system administrator. So provide technical support for both hardware and software issues our users encounter. So if common people are comes to the system or lab, then if he found some issues, then it provide technical support both hardware and software. So manages the configurations and operations of client-based computer operating systems. So this type of configurations and operation client server communications it manages, and if needed and updated operating systems, and it also install. Then monitor the system daily and respond immediately security and usability concerns. So it always monitors the system so that it works efficiently. Create and verify, it is also we have discussed. Verify backup data and information. So response to result help desk if some required to others persons, it should be must response and provide helps. So upgrade system and process as required for enhanced functionality and security issues. It is also important issue. Upgrade the system process as required and makes enhance the system and functionality which look at the security issues also. So administered infrastructure including firewalls, database, malware protection, software and other processes. So these are the basic rules of a system administrator. So if you come Linux system administrator, so it is again important issues because Linux system administrator is actually the system administrator in Linux operating system environment. So if we see the system admin here, the role is same as that of we have discussed system admin, but the environment is actually in Linux. So at first duty is actually installations the Linux operating system in the system, and system administration covers all the things that we have to do keep a computer system in usable order. It includes things like backing up files, installing new programs, creating accounts for users, making certain that our file system is not corrupted, so on. If a computer this type of all primary duties, but it is in Linux environment. So the structure of this um, then he should always proficient in Linux environment and Linux command, how they are actually installed, what type of uh, files or commands needed to do well the system. So while it is mandatory, Unix operating systems, so some Unix and Linux it is so some command also from Unix operating system, and it should have knowledge, better knowledge. So now if we see the Linux or GNU Linux, so what type of, so Linux has lots of versions, so what type of version we need the system, so it should maintain it, it should install it, this type of then if we see Michael, he may be also have another operating system with the same Linux. So if we see the overview of Linux system, we should the various part of the operating system. So Unix and Unix-like operating systems such as Linux consist of a kernel and some system programs. So Unix or Linux is nothing but consists of kernel and some system programs. So there are also some application programs for doing work. So application program also included that the kernel is the heart of the operating system. No, the kernel is nothing but the heart of the operating system. In fact, it is often mistakenly considered to the operating system itself, but it is not. An operating system provides many more services than plain kernel. So this how kernel is different from operating system. Sometimes operating system and kernel are same, but in big sense kernel is actually included in operating system. So an operating system provide many more services than a kernel. Kernel is actually in smaller sense and operating system in bigger sense. So if we see um, lots of commands, so system programs are used to tools provided by the kernel to implement various services required from the operating system. So system programs or other programs run on the top of the kernel in what is called user mode. So there are two modes, one is user mode and another is kernel mode. So again sometimes we have system calls, so tools provided by the kernel through system calls. So kernel provide system calls so that user usually interact with the kernel. And so the difference between system and application program in one of intent applications are intended for getting useful things done, whereas system programs are needed to get the system working. So a word processor is an application, mount is a system program. So how system program is different from application program? So difference is that so operating systems can also contain compiler and corresponding libraries. So for example GCC libraries, in particular Linux. So although not all programming languages need to be part of the operating system, so some compilers are by default built in the Linux operating system. So if we see the important parts of the kernel, so the Linux kernel consists of several important parts, which are process management, memory management, hardware device driver, file system drivers, network management, and various other bits and pieces. So it is the kernel system of Linux is consists of lots of parts. Number one, process management, memory management, hardware device driver, file system drivers, network management, etc. etc. If we see the Linux administered, so if we see the environment, so these are user level programs. So this is normal programs, and now system call interface. This is the how this interact with kernels. So here we have lots of parts: virtual file system management, memory manager, process manager, abstract network socket services, etc. Various file system driver and TCP/IP protocol driver, and finally these are actually connected with hard disk drive, floppy drive, Ethernet card, and this is the kernel. So middle portion is kernel, and this is finally hardware. So hard disks, floppy disks, and Ethernet card. So probably the most important part of the kernel are memory management and process management. So how memory and process are managed in the operating system is important part of the kernel. So memory management takes care of assigning memory areas, swap spaces areas to the processes, the part of kernel and other for the buffer case, and process management creates processes and implements multitasking by switching the active processes on processor. So the kernel environment is actually mainly basically two important components. One is memory management and there is process management. So at the lowest level, the kernel contains hardware device driver for each kind of hardware it supports. So since the world is full of different kinds of hardware, the number of hardware device driver is large. So there are often many otherwise similar processes are hardware defined and controlled by the software. The similarities may be possible to have general classes of drivers and with similar operations. Each member of them is okay. Now the software services provided by the kernel itself have similar properties. So therefore the abstract classes, for example, various network protocols have been abstracted into one programming interface. So the BSD socket library and an example virtual file system, etc. etc. So major service in a Linux system, if we see major services in a Linux environment, then we first come to the init. The single most important services in a Unix operating system provided by init. Init init, which is started as the first process of every Linux system. So init started the first process of every Unix operating system as the last things the kernel does when it boots. So when it starts, it continues the boot process by doing various startup course, checking and mounting files and starting demos, etc. The exact list of things that init does depends on which flavor it is. There are several to choose from. Init usually provide a concept of single user mode in which no one can log in and root uses as shell at the console, and the usual mode is called multi-user mode. So some flavors generalize that run levels. Single and multi-user modes are considered to be two run levels. So this is init system. This is about the init system. And again, the normal operation init makes sure get you working. This some important commands. So if we see the logins from terminals, so logins from terminals are provided by getty program. So getty is the program, and init starts a separate instance of getty for its terminal account. The logins are to be allowed. So getty reads the username and login programs which read the password. So getty command is also in the important issues. If the username and password are correct, login runs the shell. When the shell terminates, user logouts, and when login terminates because the username and password did not match in its notice. This is it. Again, it's another important system log. So the kernel and mini system programs produce error warning and other messages. So it is often important that message can be viewed later or much later. So the program doing this system log, so it can be configured to sort messages to different files according to writer or degree of importance. So now periodic commands execution cron and at. So both user and system admin often need to run commands periodically. So cron services is set up to this user. Each user can have a content files where he lists the commands he wishes to execute and times. So the cron daemons takes care of starting the commands unspecified. And AT service similar to cron, but this once only and command executed but not repeated. So if we see graphical user interface, Unix and Linux don't incorporate the user interface into kernel. Instead, they let be implemented by user level programs. So this applies both text mode and graphical environment. So the arrangement makes the system more flexible, but disadvantage that it is simple to implement a different user interface for its program, making the system harder to learn. The graphical environment primarily used within Linux is called X Windows system. X is so there are two popular desktop manager KDE and Genome. These are nothing but the graphical user interface. Networking. So networking is an act of connecting two or more computers we have already known. They are communicate each other. So actual method connecting communicating are slightly complicated, but result is present. So Unix operating system many networking features. Both basic services can be done over the network. So the Linux system administration since centralization while still reaping benefits of migration. So Linux administrator can do this. Network logins. So network logins work a little differently than normal login. So for each person login via network, there are separate virtual network connections given number of bits depending on the available. So bandwidth. So it is therefore not possible to run a separate gateway for each possible virtual connections. There are also several different ways to log in via network, telnet and SS, each being the major ones of TCP/IP networks. So these are now network file systems. So one of the more useful things that can be done networking service is sharing files via network file system. So NFS. So depending on our network, this could be done over the network file system and over the common interface net file system. So NFS are really AMX based services inline supported by kernels. These are some services. Next, mail. So electronic mail is most popularly used method communicating by counter electronic letter is used. So each user is an incoming mailbox. Finally, printing command also done in Linux environment. So file system layout. So file system is actually in Linux environment divided many parts, usually long of lines root file system with slash bin live slash lib slash ect and slash a few others. User file system program instance that. So hard file system with sensing data and a home for every person file. So depending on hardware configurations and the decision system divisions can be different. It can even be in one file system. So this is basically today's class. So I'll come on to next class.